So as we all know, India is going to enter its Mars Mahadasha in the coming month of September. And like I said in the previous video, there are going to be certain changes, there are going to be certain things which are going to be different for India. And one of those things is, of course, India's relationship with foreign nations. And that can be seen from the recent increase in tariffs by the US, which has naturally affected the way India is going to be doing business with the US. The other thing also which I mentioned was that the spirituality that is there in India will increase and people will be more bold and forthright about their religious beliefs, and that can be seen from the Mahavatar Nrsimha movie, the way it has performed in the past few days. And what is actually very interesting and very relevant actually is that the avatar of Lord Vishnu, which is associated with the planet Mars, is Narasimhadev. And the fact that his movie was released just short time before the coming of the Mars Dasha, and the fact that people have received it so well and are feeling very connected with the story, that naturally also shows, you know, the increase in the belief that people have in Sanatan Dharma. And Nrsimhadev is the lord for war, for violence, for protecting Dharma and his devotee. And in the process of protection, there is no holding back in the way he killed and completely destroyed Hiranyakashipu, right? So that is also something which when the movie did so well, I was just thinking that how it is actually not a coincidence that the first movie that they released was Mahavatar Nrsimha, and the Mars Dasha is about to start, and Nrsimhadev and Mars have such a connection between them. So now let us go slightly deeper into this topic and see a few more things. First, let us discuss about Mars being in Ardra Nakshatra, and after that we will also discuss the Antardashas which are going to be coming in this Mahadasha of Mars. So let us first just see how is the chart of India even made, right? So we take the 15th of August 1947 at 12 AM in the morning, right, midnight, when India was formed, and the place will be New Delhi because that's the capital of the country. So the chart that is formed taking this information into consideration has Mars in the second house. So the rising sign is the sign of Taurus, and Mars is in the second house of speech and finances and expression, right? And it is in the sign of Gemini, ruled by Mercury, and in the Nakshatra of Ardra, the ruler of which is Rahu. And Rahu is of course sitting in the first house of the chart. The lord of this Nakshatra is also considered to be Rudra. That is again another fierce form of Lord Shiva. So there's a lot of fierceness actually coming in this whole time period, and we cannot avoid it. There's basically no way of avoiding it. So anyway, discussing about this Ardra Nakshatra. So first thing is that Ardra Nakshatra is represented by a head, a human head, right? And the ruler being Rahu. Rahu is just the head. There is no body for the personality of Rahu. So that means that there is going to be a lot of thinking, right? A lot of analyzing of things. It is also the second house of speech, and Rahu, Ardra, they both have, you know, the face, and the mouth is definitely also a part of the face. So speech is again going to be very important throughout the Mars Dasha, the way India is communicating. Now Rudra being the ruler of this nakshatra and Rahu being the lord as well, there is definitely going to be some or the other destruction. Rahu is not the most peaceful planet, right? It's a lot about action and passion, and even the planet Mars in itself, you know, it's such a passionate planet. It has so much energy and strength. So there is definitely going to be something or the other in which there are going to be conflicts. It could be within the nation, it could also be international. Both things are likely to happen actually, and it could also mean sudden disasters. It could be natural disasters as well. However, we do have to understand that not everything is catastrophic, not everything is the end of the world, but rather the same Ardra Nakshatra actually is not just about destruction, not just about the difficulties, but at the same time it also represents the calm and the peace which comes after the destruction. So the destruction or certain events will definitely happen, but it will ultimately lead to a more clear picture and a better situation for India. This Ardra Nakshatra also represents Yatna Shakti, or the effort that a person puts in, right? Mars is also about putting in the effort, doing the work, right? It's a very passionate planet. So activity is paramount to the planet Mars, right? It is extremely important. So when we put all of this together, it definitely also shows that there is going to be a lot of effort put in by India. And when we say India over here, it means the government of India, the population of India, India in general, every part of it, right? There's a lot of effort going to be put in into improvements, into betterment, and that effort, if done consistently, will definitely lead to good results. However, yes, there will be pain. Effort does not happen without a certain amount of sacrifice, without a certain amount of pain, and that is a part of it. That is a part of the process, and it should be accepted and willingly performed, right? Willingly we have to put in the effort, and we have to understand that we have to also sacrifice our comfort, right? We cannot just be in our comfort zone. That is also very necessary to understand. Now this Ardra Nakshatra is also represented by a teardrop, and a teardrop naturally also means that there are going to be certain events which can cause a certain amount of anxiety and sadness and distress in the people of India, and that is going to happen as well. Naturally, if there's going to be conflict, internal or international, and if there's going to be strained relationships with foreign nations, and if there are going to be natural disasters, then definitely there will be certain situations which will be unfortunate, which will be troublesome for the nation and the people of it, and that will naturally, fulfill the significance of this teardrop. The Nakshatra Lord Rahu is sitting in the first house, and the first house represents the nation itself, right? The entirety of that's the main part of the chart. So there is going to be a lot of central kind of an effect of Rahu in the chart. Now looking at the dashas, or rather the Antardashas that the country is going to go through, first is of course going to be the Mars Mahadasha and Mars Antardasha within the Mars Mahadasha. Now when we look at the effect of dashas, not only do we have to look at where the planet is sitting in the chart, but at the same time we also make a Dasha Lagna chart, which is basically putting the Dasha Lord as the first house. So if we have Mars Mahadasha coming up, right, which is there in the natural second house of the chart of India, we'll take that as the Lagna and position all the other planets accordingly. So if we put Mars in the first house, right, and Mars Mahadasha, Mars Antardasha, so it is naturally going to affect the first house, or whatever is signified by the first house. It is going to affect the second house because in the natural chart of India it is there in the second house, and at the same time it's going to affect the houses which it aspects. So taking Dasha Lagna is going to aspect the 4th, 7th and 8th houses, and from the perspective of the positioning of Mars in the Lagna chart of the country, it is going to be aspecting again the 4th, 7th and 8th, which correspond to the 5th, 8th and 9th house in the Lagna chart of the country. So during this Mars Mahadasha, Mars Antardasha, we can expect all these different houses to be in some or the other way affected. So first of all, Mars being in the first house, that means that the nation is going to be very forward moving, right, very putting a lot of effort and endeavor into improvement, being very forthright, very direct, right? Mars is a very straightforward kind of a planet. So there is there's going to be a lot of strength in the way of presentation, in the way of approaching things. At the same time, we should not forget the fact that it is in the sign of Gemini. Gemini is the twins, right, is represented by the twins, and that means that India will have the ability to be diplomatic as well, right? It's not going to show its true face everywhere. It is going to have a part. So Gemini generally, is this dual-faced, dual personality sign, in which what is the truth is not necessarily always what is portrayed or what is shown. And this can go either way. It can work to India's benefit, and at the same time it can at times prove to be a bit of a problem. But what I think personally is that the leaders are going to be intelligent enough not to show their true intentions at all times in front of everyone, and rather be diplomatic and to some extent not exactly secretive, but reserved in their stance in the world, that they're not going to always tell what their intentions really are, right? And I think the government currently is also capable enough of withholding the true intentions and presenting a picture which is required at that particular point, and then afterwards it is revealed that there is another side to the entire story as well. So that diplomacy is going to be there, but regardless of it, the passion, the assertiveness is still definitely going to be there. Now it's going to affect the second house, and like I was saying, the fourth and the fifth house as well, right? And all these houses are directly, indirectly connected to education. So education is actually another thing which is going to see a change. And as we already know, that there is discussion of bringing and changes are actually being brought into the curriculum of the schools in India, and things are going to change in the way history is presented. And I personally think that is a wonderful step taken by the government, and that is going to give a clearer picture of the actual Indian history. And also, see, again, Mars is about confidence, right? So when we are presenting history in the way it is, there is going to be a lot more confidence, and Indians are going to feel pride and confidence on the history, right? So that is a very positive change which is going to happen because of Mars being connected to or aspecting this second, fourth and fifth house of education. Now that is also the house of speech, the second house. So like we already said, there's going to be assertiveness, there's going to be strength in the way that things are going to be said. However, not only strength and assertiveness, Mars can at times be a bit harsh and rude. And also the fact that Rahu is the lord of the Nakshatra where Mars is sitting. So there can be situations where, even though India attempts to be diplomatic, the things which are said can be taken as being rude or overly assertive. So that is there. So it will not always rub nicely with everyone the way India is going to be vocal about things. Now coming to the fact that it is also aspecting the 7th and the 8th houses, that is of course again the relationships that the nation has with other countries, that is going to be affected. And the 8th house represents sudden changes. So there are going to be sudden events happening, unpredictable, unexpected changes, or things which would take place actually during this time. And naturally it also aspects the 9th house in the Lagna chart of the nation, and that again, like we already discussed with the coming of the movie, and India in general is going to feel more proud about their religion and spirituality. Now this, in the Lagna chart of India, it is also aspecting the 4th house, right? Because Mars aspects the 4th house from itself as well. So the 4th house represents home, represents the space that we live in, and it will also represents the borders of the nation, right? And like we know, in East India, a lot of Bangladeshis are being pushed back to Bangladesh, and it's becoming more strict and it's becoming more rigid, right? And that is again a very Mars thing actually to happen. So protecting the boundaries of the nation, protecting the boundaries of the home. So that is something which is also being seen, which is also coming into effect during this time, and it is being done with a certain amount of aggression, right? Because it is Mars. So there is going to be a certain amount of aggression in which in the way that this is implemented. And again, it's not going to rub very nicely for everyone. But again, the question is about the perspective. So from certain perspective, this is an excellent move, but at the same time, it's not going to rub well with certain people who are not in favor of it. And that again will strain relationships with certain people, and then there will be trouble. But at the same time, till when is a nation supposed to just sit quietly and tolerate things? Mars is the time when there is going to be retaliation and there is going to be an answer back. That is for sure. And anybody who sees the general good of India would support such an act of assertiveness, really. But definitely diplomacy must also be taken care of. Now this Mars Mahadasha, Mars Antardasha is going to go on till February next year, right? And all these things that we just discussed are going to be very prominent during this time period. Also the UCC, right? That is also expected around the end of the year, which is going to happen between this, within this Mars time period. And so yeah, a lot of things are going to happen within this time period, and a lot of these things are going to be actually very good. Now, before moving on to the next Antardasha, one thing which I would like to mention over here is that we often think in terms of what is good and what is bad, right? Somebody was mentioning in the comments to the last video that the Moon Mahadasha was good, that's coming to an end, and now we are going to go through Mars Mahadasha and it's going to be like this and that. Well, first of all, the entire thing of good and bad is very subjective, right? What is good for one person is not going to be good for the other, right? The Operation Sindoor proved to be good to India, like, terrorism was put in check, right? There was a check put to terrorism, but from the Pakistani perspective, it wasn't good, right? So it really depends on what perspective are we looking at things from. The second thing also, like Moon Mahadasha was very good. Yes, no doubt about it. Moon is a very gentle planet. Moon is a very nourishing and nurturing kind of a planet. But at the same time, if we look at the situation of Moon in the chart of India, it is going towards Amavasya, right? It is very close to the sun. So actually, when Moon is waning and it is so close to the sun, it actually loses a lot of its benefic properties and it actually becomes a malefic planet. But at the same time, we can also not ignore the fact that the nakshatra in which Moon is sitting, the Pushya Nakshatra, that is a very auspicious nakshatra and it is in its own sign. So definitely it did a lot of good. But at the same time, the traditional view of this is good and this is bad has to always be taken into consideration, keeping in mind the context and keeping in mind a lot of things actually. We cannot label a planet as good or bad. I mean, even Saturn at times gives pretty good results. It does not, however, leave its innate nature, delays and having to be patient, and obstructions are naturally a part of Saturn, but it doesn't mean that it cannot give good results. And on the other hand, Jupiter, which is a benefic planet, can at times, depending on its positioning in the chart and how it is acting, can give negative results as well. So the thing that Moon was a good time period and Mars is going to be a tough time period, well, I wouldn't say, that it's that simplistic. There's a lot more, there's a lot of layers to it, and to understand each of that, we have to really go deep into understanding what is actually happening in a particular situation. So right now, the nation being assertive and doing what is right for the nation, that is definitely not a bad thing. Even though we might lose a certain amount of gentleness and we might endanger certain relationships, that, however, we have to see in context of what is there for the greater good of the nation, what needs to be done, right? Now from February next year, the Mars Rahu Dasha, so the Antardasha of Rahu within the Mahadasha of Mars is going to start, and that I would say is going to be the toughest part of the entire Mars Mahadasha, right? So Rahu Antardasha starting from February 2026 and going on till February 2027. That time period is going to see the maximum amount of, you know, the negative effects, let's say, of this time period. First of all, looking at it from whatever is happening right now and the first Mars Dasha, right? So seeing all the changes that are going to happen, naturally the impact of it, the negative impact of it is going to happen during the Mars Rahu Dasha. Now this Mars Rahu Dasha, Rahu is sitting in the 12th house from Mars. Remember, I was mentioning the Dasha Lagna chart. So in the Dasha Lagna chart, where Mars is in the first house, Rahu is going to be in the 12th house, because Rahu is in the first house in the Lagna chart of the nation. So naturally it will come into the 12th house from Mars. Now 12th house is the house of loss, imprisonment, is the house of expenditure, it is a house of, you know, misfortune, because it is one of the Dushtana houses. So naturally there is going to be some tough time during the Mars Rahu Dasha. That 1 year, I would say everybody has to be a bit careful of everything, you know, not be overly optimistic and not be overly negligent of any kind of warnings which are being given. That is the time period where I think there would be the most amount of loss of life as well, because of whatever military events might happen during that time period. Also, again, because of strained relationships with foreign nations, there will be difficulty for those Indians living in foreign nations. And like also recently it has come in the news that Trump is not very much favoring having Indians employed by the IT companies in the US, and he is encouraging them to hire US citizens. So that actually is going to also create a tough situation for Indians abroad, and that is further going to strain the relationships of the nation. And this time period, Mars Rahu Dasha, that is really going to be the part where, you know, Rahu is again the lord of the Ardra Nakshatra as well. So the tears of difficulties, and it's not just tears, it's also the droplets of sweat and perspiration. So, you know, the effort, there is going to be a lot of hard work and a lot of distress during that time period. So the Mars Rahu Dasha is going to be tough. Also, Rahu represents everything foreign. Rahu also represents electronic devices, right? So there is going to be some sort of a cyber event, cyber difficulties will be there for the nation, and that will strain the relationship with foreign countries. So I don't know, a cyber warfare kind of a situation might be there during this Mars Rahu Dasha, and there will be feelings of loss, and there will be factual loss as well, and there will be feelings of imprisonment and restraint, you know, as if the country feels that they're not able to fully grow because of the restrictions that are being caused by foreign nations. Naturally, sitting in the 12th house, Rahu is also going to aspect the 6th house, and in the Lagna chart of the country, Rahu is sitting in the 1st house aspecting the 7th house, right? Of course, the 5th and the 9th aspects are there as well, which will slightly have effects as well. But talking about the 6th house and the 7th house in particular, 6th house again refers to imprisonment, refers to distress. Both these houses, the 12th house and the 6th house, are Dushtana houses, grief inflicting houses. So that time period is going to be tough. 7th house again, foreign relations are going to be strained, and this time period is going to be followed by the Mars Jupiter Dasha, which will start end of February 2027, going on till end of January, beginning February 2028. Now Jupiter is sitting in the 6th house in the Lagna chart of the nation, right? And from the Dasha Lagna, it's sitting in the 5th house. So from both perspectives, right, it's going to naturally affect the 5th and the 6th houses and the significations of these houses, and at the same time it's going to affect the 11th and 12th houses, the 7th from where it is sitting, right, and it is also going to affect the 5th, which means the 10th and the 11th houses naturally, and the 9th house as well. So basically it's impacting more or less the entire chart. But talking about the 9th from itself, it would be impacting the 1st and the 2nd houses. So what this means, what I think it's going to do is, first of all, after this entire turbulent period of Mars and Rahu Dasha, right, there is going to be a time where India is going to be respected as the guru, right, because it's Jupiter. Jupiter means guru. Now naturally, Jupiter coming in the 5th house in the Dasha Lagna, 5th house is the house of, is one of the Dharma houses, right, and is the house of learning as well and intelligence, right. So that is one of the houses that is going to be impacted, and it will naturally aspect the 9th house from its 5th aspect, right. So it is sitting in the 5th house from the Dasha Lagna, it's aspecting the 9th house from the Dasha Lagna, right. So both these houses are again spiritual and also being the guru, being the leader, right. So Bharat being the Vishwa Guru, that kind of a situation can be seen during this time. There is going to be a lot of attention towards what India has to say, and India is going to be in a position where they can actually lead and actually be an inspiration and a guru, you know, a teacher figure for the entire world. So I think it's going to be quite an interesting time period. Also Mars and Jupiter are friends, so the fact that these two planets get along nicely together is also going to be helpful in the way it is impacting the nation. It is going to naturally also aspect the 12th house, and it is sitting in the 6th house in the Lagna chart of the nation. So in that situation, there is still going to be some amount of loss. I would say the loss of old ideologies might be there, the loss of certain restricting components might also be there. See, loss is not always a bad thing. There can be good loss as well. We can lose old mindsets, we can lose broken systems, right, and build new ones instead. So I think the Mars-Jupiter period should prove to be pretty good. The fact that it is there in the 6th house represents enemies, but it also represents overcoming the enemies, right. So I think there is going to be more diplomacy during that time, more ability to lead the world. Diplomacy, the reason why I'm saying that is because Jupiter is sitting in the sign of Libra. Libra is the other diplomatic sign which has good relations actually. Libra represents good relations. So the relationships which are being spoiled in the first 2 years, some of it might be amended during this Mars-Jupiter period, and overall the nation will be able to overcome the challenges and the enemies and the obstructions that are there in its path. I don't want to sound overly optimistic, so I will definitely add that the fact it's there in the 6th house, aspect in the 12th house, will have its own sort of impacts as well. But overall, in comparison to the Mars Rahu Dasha which is going to precede it, it's going to be a comparatively much better, much more fruitful time period for everyone in the nation. Next is the Mars-Saturn Dasha, which is starting from February 2028 till March 2029. Now Saturn is a planet which represents hard work, which represents maturity, which represents doing the karma, right? And at the same time, Shanidev is also known as Karma Phal Data, the giver of the results. So definitely there will be also the results being received, but there's a lot of emphasis on working hard, putting in the effort and being patient. So after I mean, if you look at it in the way of a story, right? So all these changes are being made, and then Mars Mahadasha, all the challenges that come because of the changes, and then the Mars Jupiter period in which India will come forward as the guru, right? And will do pretty well, I would say. After that comes the Mars-Saturn period. So now the stage has been set. India is there in the forefront, in the limelight, right? But then comes the time when there has to be actual effort, where there actually has to be endeavor from our side. See, Mars means endeavor, right? And Saturn in the Lagna chart of the country is sitting in the third house, right? The third house is the house of courage, is the house of putting in our own effort. So whenever Saturn is actually sitting in the third house, the person has this desire to do things on their own strength, not depending on others. So this Make in India, the whole thing of being self-reliant is going to become very prominent during that time period, where the nation is going to try to be as much as possible, be self-reliant and develop the nation's own economy, right? The nation's own financial independence, let's put it that way. And the reason why it will have an impact on the finances as well is because it is sitting in the second house from Mars, so from the Dasha Lagna, right? It's sitting in the second house of finances. So the progress will be slow and steady because it is Saturn, but at the same time there will be efforts put in that direction, and there will be, after initial setbacks, because Saturn does not come without a certain amount of, obstacles basically, or not even obstacles, I would just say delays. Everything just takes so much longer to fructify. It's a very slow moving planet, but it is going to be a time period where everybody is going to really work hard, put in the effort, and at the end of the day reap the results of it. Following the Saturn sub-period is the Mercury sub-period, so the Mars-Mercury Dasha, which is going on from March 2029 till March 2030. Now this also is going to be a time period where finances are going to be in view, and again it's sitting in the second house from Mars, from the Dasha Lagna, and it is sitting naturally in the third house of communications and courage in the main Lagna chart of the nation. So that means that during that time period, so whatever slowness was there, whatever delays were there during the sub period of Saturn, those things are going to pick up speed and things will happen much faster, right? Mercury also represents electronics and all kind of technology, so there is going to be technological advancement during that time period. Communications will be good during that time period. And it is also, remember, it is also the dispositor of Mars, means Mars is sitting in the sign of Gemini, and Gemini is ruled by the planet Mercury. So naturally there is going to be a lot of intelligence during that time period. Intelligent decisions will be made, and communication will be not just assertive but at the same time very intelligent and very thoughtful. And it is sitting in the third house of courage as well. So again, the entire thing of wanting to do things on ourselves is going to continue. Being courageous is going to be continued. And from the third house, it is aspecting the ninth house. Both in the Saturn Antardasha and in the Mercury Antardasha, is aspecting the natural ninth house. So again, the entire spiritual thing is going to still be in place. Saturn, even though we generally don't think of Saturn as a particularly spiritual planet, but actually it does bring the spiritual depth, right? Jupiter is the expansiveness, but the depth comes from Saturn. So during the Saturn Antardasha, there will be more depth in the spiritual practices of the people of the nation, right? Because it's the seventh, and at the same time it's also the 8th house from the Dasha Lagna. It is aspecting the 8th house. Both Saturn and Mercury right now we're talking about, they're both aspecting the natural 8th house in the Dasha Lagna. So that means sudden events. So there are going to be sudden events basically throughout the Mars Mahadasha, but specifically during the Antardashas where planets are sitting in the natural second house from the Dasha Lagna, right? And that is a lot of planets are actually sitting in the second house in the Dasha Lagna, and that is aspect in the 8th house, and there are going to be sudden events based on the nature of the planet that is there in the Antardasha. That is going to tell whether those sudden events are going to be fruitful or are they going to be troublesome, right? So with Saturn there might be some troublesome sudden events happening. With Mercury, I think overall it will be sudden events to the benefit of the nation, right? So that is going to happen from March 2029 till March 2030. Following the Mars-Mercury Dasha is the Mars-Ketu Dasha, which will start in March 2030, go until August 2030, just a small 5 months time period in which Ketu is going to be there. Ketu is a planet of confusion, uncertainty, lack of clarity, detachment, right? And at the same time, it can create certain obstructive events as well. Now, Ketu in the Dasha Lagna is sitting in the 6th house. In the Lagna chart of India, it is sitting in the 7th house. So, I would say that time period can be overall a time period of uncertainty. A time period where there is no clarity in regards to what direction are we supposed to go in, right? So this entire time everything goes good, everything is fine, but change is inevitable, right? And there's always something or the other which is happening. And during this time period is the time when there is a lack of clarity and a certain amount of detachment as well. A certain amount of detachment in regards to 7th house relationships, right? And the 6th house of overcoming competition, overcoming enemies, right? So there is a certain amount of detachment of, just kind of not overly endeavoring and not overly involved with other nations, and just not caring very much about competition, rather being a bit more reserved and a bit of a recluse during that time period, because that is the quality of Ketu. However, the time period is very short. I wouldn't too much bother about the time period is very short, and even though the effects might be felt for a certain amount of time, but it won't be quite as prominent as other longer Antardashas which are there in this time period. After the Mars-Ketu Dasha comes the Mars-Venus Dasha, which is going to go on from August 2030 till October 2031. Now, Mars-Venus. Venus is sitting again. There's so many planets in this one house, right? The 3rd house of the chart of India, and in the Dasha Lagna it comes into the 2nd house naturally. So Venus is again sitting in the 2nd house. Now, the 2nd house of finances, right? And even though Saturn and Mercury were also sitting in the house of finances, but I did not so much stress over the financial aspects of thing in that, because naturally Saturn and Mercury are not exactly the significators of finance, but Venus definitely does have a connection with finance, right? And that being in the 2nd house, I think India is going to financially benefit during that time period. Okay, so now Venus is ruling the sign of Taurus, right, which is going to be right now in the 12th house in the Dasha Lagna, and it is also ruling the 5th house of gains, right, in the Dasha Lagna again. So first of all, even though there is going to be financial gains during this time, there is also going to be a certain amount of expenditure, because it is ruling the sign of Taurus in the 12th house. But at the same time, the 5th house, right, the 5th house of actually it is the 5th house of speculative gains, right? But it is opposite the 11th house of gains. So I think there's going to be financial gain during this time period. Following the Mars-Venus Dasha is the Mars-Sun Dasha, which is going to be there for a couple of months from October 2031 till February 2032. Now during this time period, India is going to be more confident, right? Because Sun represents our confidence. It is also going to do well as a leader because again Sun represents leadership. It is again in the second house from the Dasha Lagna. It is in the third house from the Lagna chart of the nation, the third house of courage, the second house of speech. So again, authoritative speech will be there. You know, India will be seen as an authority and be heard as an authority. There can be throughout the entire time certain changes because of its aspect on the 8th house in the Dasha Lagna. But it's a very small time period. But I think the population of the country is going to see certain improvements in their careers during this time. Sun also does represent the profession of a person. So from the point of view of the work space, you know, in the country, the working atmosphere, right, that will improve. There will be definitely a general improvement in the work and the activities of the nation and the people of the nation. Following that, the very last time period is going to be that of Mars Moon, which is starting in February 2032 and going on till September 2032. Now this time period, Mars Moon is going to be emotionally not the easiest. Reason being that Mars is a very strong, passionate planet and Moon is this gentle, soft, emotional kind of a planet, right? So I would expect that there could be some amount of emotional difficulties for the nation in general. Again, it's the second house of speech, third house of courage in the Lagna chart of the nation, right? And but Moon is in the sign of Cancer. People will move on. Cancer is like a river. It means forward movement, progress, not looking back. So the nation is actually going to be quite different in the next coming 7-8 years. There are going to be a lot of changes. India is not going to be the way it was till now. It's going to be much more assertive, much more strong, much more prominent. Its presence in the world is going to be much more prominent. And even though Mars is considered to be a cruel planet and it is sitting in Ardra Nakshatra, which is a difficult nakshatra in itself, and there are going to be troubles, no doubt about it. There is going to be certain internal or external conflict. There could be a situation of war. There will be certain disasters as well. But after the storm, right, Ardra Nakshatra ruled by Rudra is the storm. There is going to be a storm for the coming years, but the end result of it is that India is going to be actually in a better position than what it is right now. It's high time that the country be assertive, and it is going to be doing pretty well. Naturally, we cannot say good or bad because it's always a mix of everything. So we cannot expect things to be perfect, right? Like we already discussed, there are going to be challenges as well. But the overall outcome, I personally think, is going to be pretty positive. That Mars Mahadasha is going to be followed by Rahu Mahadasha. What comes in Rahu, that we will discuss in another video, and definitely we'll make a video about that as well, perhaps in some time. So that is my understanding of how the Mars Mahadasha and the Antardashas within this Mahadasha are going to be like. Do let me know what you think about this in the comments, and let me know if you would want me to make an even more elaborate video, because right now, as many of you would have noticed, that we have only actually touched about which house the planet is sitting in relation to the Dasha Lagna and the Lagna chart of the nation. But there's a lot more actually to it. We can always look at what houses they are aspecting, what houses are being ruled by those planets, Like I said, you know, astrology is like multiple layers. We can go deeper and deeper, and there's always more to explore, more to understand. But this in itself is going to be a long video, so we'll stop it over here. But if you want me to make an even longer, even more detailed video, then do let me know and we can do that as well.